This is Eric Rattan of Cannibal Corpse. You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast with Andrew McKay Smith.
Greetings and thank you so much for tuning in. The conversation you're about to listen to features guitar maestro extraordinaire Robben Ford. Now, if you've tuned in via YouTube, you know exactly who Robben is, but if you're listening to my podcast, you might not be familiar. So I'm going to go over a snapshot of some of the credits attributed to this great guitarist. Apart from being a solo artist in his own right with many releases to his credit, he's also played with such esteemed company as former Beatle George Harrison. He played on Dark Horse in 1974, and I believe he participated in what was... Well, I know for a fact he participated in the tour, but I think it was George's only tour. So there you go. He was the guitarist on that one. We talk about that. He also recorded some guitars. A bit more than just recorded some guitars, but either way, features on Creatures of the Night, the album from Kiss when things were splintering, and they were looking for a new guitarist to join full-time and take over the role that Ace had long filled. And he has a big reveal about that. Something else, he worked with Bruce Willis. That's right, the actor. He worked on a solo album from him, If It Don't Kill You, It Just Makes You Stronger. And there's so many other people that he's worked with, such as Barbara Streisand, but perhaps his tour de force is working with Miles Davis. Stick around and tune in to what he has to say about working with probably, I don't know, would you call him the greatest musician of all time? He's certainly up there. Either way, the catalyst for the chat, though, is the release of a brand new solo album from Robben titled Pure. And as far as I'm concerned, if you're looking for anywhere to start with this great man's extraordinary body of work, Pure is a pretty bloody good one. So here he is, Robben Ford.
I'm also a musician, and it's somebody like yourself, I think, has been a guiding light within our lives in so many ways, you know, and I'm loving this new album. It's called Pure, of course. And look, I take it that the title is to mean that we're getting a pure dose of Robben Ford, because that's certainly how I'm taking it, you know, with your incredibly crisp guitar tone and the placement of notes. So, yeah, look, just congratulations on the album. And is there anything you wanted to say up top about it?
Indeed, in the title, there are a couple of things indicated that, it is purely instrumental. It has no other intention than making great music. And that I built this record basically from the ground up with my co-producer engineer, Casey Wasner. So, my usual MO in making a record is to write a bunch of songs, go into a studio with a chosen group of people, record for 4 days, 5 days, and then start the overdubbing process. But I started with that notion, didn't have a lot of material. I had just started writing. Went into the studio 2-3 times with other musicians, and I just knew that I had to do this record a different way, because I wanted it to be exactly what I wanted. I didn't want it to be a give and take process at all. And playing with other people is give and take. I wanted everything to be exactly as I wanted it to be, And so, my Casey Wasner and I, we would build the tracks. We'd put together some kind of a, through technology, a drum track. And then I would play a bass, and then I'd play a rhythm guitar, and then I'd play a melody, and then I'd play a solo, so to speak, very, beginning through, and then send it to others to put drums on. There's 5 different drummers on the record. And, they would record drums at home. This was during COVID. So a lot of this was going on everywhere. You know, you weren't getting together with people quite the same way that you would. So drums were overdubbed, and then I would bring a bass player in, and the bass player, you know, would lay down a bass track. But all of this with, you know, the entire, you know, structure is there. The vibe that I want, you know, the tempo, you know, the feel. It's already been laid down by me in the studio on my own. So all they had to do was, you know, just what I asked them to do, you know. And so in that sense, it's the purest version of a Robben Ford record that one could get. It's really my construct, you know. And from that point of view, I sort of see it as it's kind of like a through composition, you know. You know, the record opens with the first thing that I wrote for the record, but I only play the melody, and then it goes straight into that blues, you know, White Rock Beer, and then evolves out from there. So, you know, to me, that listening to the record is like watching a movie. You know what I mean? It's kind of like got a beginning, a middle, and an end built into it somehow. And it has to be because of that intention, that, you know, pure intention, dare I say, of having it exactly as I wanted it to be.
Yeah, well, mission accomplished on that front, no doubt. But look, to your point there, I did read the bio and the work that you're doing there with Casey. It started out as a big band, or, you know, your typical recording setup that you might have gone through on your previous 28 albums. I think I'm right in saying this is your 29th.
No, that's not true. As far as solo albums go, that's not true. You know, there have been other things. There have been things that came out under my name that weren't my name, that weren't my records. So. Oh,
right. Is that right? So we're talking about Tiger Walk. So Tiger Walk is the.
Oh no, Tiger Walk's my record for sure.
Oh yeah, no, I figured that, but I read somewhere, that was your last one, and I thought, no, that's not right, because of course you've got Wikipedia these days, and there's Discogs and the like where you can check things. So were the albums that were released, some of these ones that were released under your name, were they record company commitments, that sort of thing?
No, I mean, you know, just deliberate, you know, renaming of records, because I was the best known guy on the record. So they'd put it out, you know, company just put it out under my name instead of the actual artist who made the record.
Oh, wow.
You know,
okay.
Creepy things like that go on in the music business. But it's more like, you know, like I did a record with Joe DiOrio, for instance, and I think that's considered one of my records. It's not, you know, I just went in and played. They asked me to come in and play, and I came in and played. Just things like that, you know, where people just sort of take advantage. I'm not saying that the Joe DiOrio record was, I wasn't taken advantage of, but again, there are people who I think that's one of my records, and I've never considered it one of my records, you know.
Look, I think you've. No, fair enough. And look, I think you've almost answered my next question, but I'll go there anyway, because there are so many killer moments across the recording that I think any fan of rock, blues, and jazz guitar will find something that is a little more than just interesting for them in what you've released here with Pure. But I must say that the production is just so incredibly clean, crisp, and clear, like your note placement. It's just so tight. So was that something that evolved when you were working with Casey, or did you have that in mind before you started the album?
Everything always is an evolutionary process, you know. And I started wanting to make grittier records a while back. That this is clean and clear is true. And the last record that I did, however, was called Purple House. It was done in the same studio, and we actually did cut it with a band in that studio. And the whole MO with that was to really do almost counterintuitive things, you know. Like if it sounded good, mess it up, make it sound worse, you know, kind of, so to speak. I mean, it always has to sound good, but I really pushed the envelope on that album in terms of, you know, what one of my records would sound like. very intentionally, you know. So when we went into this record, I think it became such a clear and clean sounding record because we used a lot of technology, you know. And even when you know, make technology sound gritty, it's still digital, you know. So there's digital information on the record. The record sounds cleaner than I would like it to. But I think that has to do with the extent to which we use technology. And I love the record, don't get me wrong. I'm not unhappy at all. I love it, you know. No disappointment. But we kind of couldn't make it sound dirtier because of the amount of technology that was used. Now, this technology is all background, really, you know, because the guitars were played through amplifiers and recorded with microphones, you know. Same with the drums. Bass is usually cut direct, you know. So, and that's your instrumentation right there. You know, I didn't bring in any keyboard players. Any keyboards you hear, I played them, and they're just incidental. You know, it's just to kind of add a little something here and there. But I avoided keyboards at all costs. It's guitars, you know, for days. You know, there'll be 3, 4, and 5 guitars on these tracks. Drums, bass. Still, you know, like just the way in which we cut it. It did wind up sounding, you know, clearer almost than I would like, but no disappointments, man. I must say that this is absolutely one of my all-time favorite records I've ever made. And it kind of goes back to what we were started with, was, you know, the pure aspect of it. I mean, I controlled every note, you know, of this thing, and played most of them myself.
Look, the other thing too is that the bass lines contain plenty of hot licks to complement what you're doing with the guitar, and especially on the cut Go, which is just a rock and grooving number. I love that one there. So did you play the bass across the album and indeed on Go?
No, Go was recorded live. Bass player is a guy named Anton Nesbitt, and the drummer is a very well-known, highly regarded drummer, Nate Smith. It's from Snarky Puppy, Wolfpack, and he has his own band called Fearless Flyers. You know, he's just a great drummer who had recently moved to Nashville, and when I found out, I got in touch with him, asked him if he'd record. He said yes, and I wrote 2 songs for him. So Go is one of them, and that's a live performance, you know. And again, Anton Nesbitt on the bass. The blues, slow blues, Blues for Lonnie Johnson. That was recorded live in the studio with those same 2. Well, no, I'm sorry, I used a different bass player on that one. And there's another song that's kind of a live band performance. It's called If You Want Me To. That was cut in the studio with a band. And it's also Anton Nesbitt on bass there. He's great. Anton's great. He's a great feel. Everybody loves him.
What do you have to? I'm not saying issue instructions to a guy like Anton, but what do you say before a session to him? Do you give him a chord chart and say, mate, just do what you think fits, or do you give him more instruction than that?
Well, I've learned to shut up at first. You know, you don't start with instruction. There's the least amount of instruction, you know, that you might, you know, go for. But I have learned that it's much wiser to let people just do their thing and then make adjustments as you go. And I don't have to tell Anton anything. He produces himself, you know.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, fantastic. Choice of guitars this time around. I know you're famous for Telecaster work, but was there anything else that you decided to use in this album that might have been a first for you?
Well, the Tele is actually the least used guitar on the record of my instruments, even though the Telecaster has been, the most important guitar I've ever owned, And it does grace the cover of the album. My girlfriend, Kelly Roberts, took the photograph and did the artwork for the record. So
nice.
There's like 5 or 6 maybe different guitars on the record. Like the beginning of the album is the melody to the song Pure. That is done on an SG, 64 SG.
Mm-hmm.
The solo, which it appears the whole song is played at the end, is done on a PRS that Paul Reed Smith made for me, solid body, instrument. Mm-hmm. White Rock Beer, a Les Paul with genuine PAFs, 50s PAFs in it. The melodies to Balafon and Milan Palmo are played on a Gibson 355, a 64 Gibson 355. Solo to Milan Palmo is on a 52 Telecaster. The solo on Balafon is on my 64 Epiphone. So the record goes like that, I used a different PRS on the solo, or the performance, I should say. It's a through performance, live performance on Blues for Lonnie Johnson. That's a PRS.
Nice.
And then a B52, a B25, like a 65 B25 acoustic, plays all the acoustic on the album.
Nice. Yeah, it's actually hard to tell what guitar you're using where. You know why? And take this as a compliment because it's all you. And I've always said that as a muso, you're right-handed from memory. It's the compression ratio, and this is a bit too technical, I know, but of how hard you're pressing down on the fretboards and stuff. It varies by tiny degrees from person to person. But you're one of those players that every time you play, just with that nuance that you have, you can almost, I'm not saying you can always tell, but I can usually say, okay, there's Robben.
Yeah.
And that's certainly the case here.
Well, thank you.
Hey, did you, random question, I appreciate that, bit of a right turn, but did you ever do sessions or work with Steve Kahn from New York?
Steve Kahn?
Yeah. The jazz guitarist out of New York, yeah.
I'm acquainted with Steve, but I never played with him.
I would love to see you two do something together. If that can ever happen. Put my request in now.
Okay. I don't know. I never see him. I haven't seen him in many, many years.
Yeah. Well, hey, I want to go back in time a bit. And I appreciate you might get asked these questions a fair bit, but look, you did record 3 songs with George Harrison back in 1974, and I'm pretty sure you did some live work as well on Dark Horse. And
his only tour, yeah.
Yeah, and you actually recorded, you might have even written, so correct me if I'm wrong, the title track, Dark Horse. And so how did the introduction to George come about?
Well, I was 22 years old. I had my 23rd birthday on the Dark Horse tour in 1974. Before I met George when I was on the road with Joni Mitchell. And we played in London, and he came to the concert, and he and Tom Scott, who was sort of musical director of the LA Express, which was the band backing Joni. Tom had done a record with George producing on Ravi Shankar. Mm-hmm. And it was called Shankar Family and Friends. So it was Ravi, members of his family who were musicians and LA studio musicians, and Tom was one of them. So Tom knew George, and George had gotten in touch with Tom, said he was putting together a band for a tour of his own, And he came to the show ostensibly to check out the LA Express. And we had a couple of days off, so we all went out to George's, place, Henley-on-Thames, out there, and I guess so we got out there in the early afternoon. George got up in the late afternoon. And all smiles, Galois cigarette in his mouth, and we hung out all day, through the evening, and we started recording at 3:00 in the morning. And we cut Simply Shady and Horizontour Express, 2 of the 3 songs that I played on that wound up on the Dark Horse record. And, said goodnight. A couple of months later, Tom said to me, George wants you to play guitar, on the tour. Tom was already doing it, but he didn't want the band, but he wanted me on guitar. And so I was invited to, do the George Harrison tour, which basically after we finished the road with Joni, the LA Express went into the studio and cut the record Tomcat. And then Tom and I went into rehearsals with George Harrison, and then went on the road with George for about 2.5 months.
Was he a nice guy? Nice fella to be around?
Oh, yeah. The thing was, he was incredibly talkative.
Really?
I mean, he never stopped talking. And just telling stories and just like on and on and on and on and on, It was kind of, so it was sort of like, he came in the room and it was kind of like the George Harrison hour, showtime.
Yeah.
Okay. You could participate if you wanted to, but it was all about him, And I don't mean that in like some egomaniacal way at all. He was a super nice cat, and he wasn't, I'm cool and you're not in any way. And he was very kind to me, But he just had such huge personality, just big personality, man.
Yeah.
So anyway. Yeah, he was a great guy. Absolutely.
Were you ever tapped on the shoulder by Gene and Paul to don the makeup when you were working on Creatures of the Night?
Well, yeah. I was, you're referring to Creatures of the Night, the Kiss album.
Yep.
And there were about 9 different guitar players who played on that record.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that they were looking for somebody, to join the band. And one night after, I was down there like every night for about 9 days recording with those guys, doing overdubs. It was all overdubs.
Yeah.
I never tracked with them. I don't think they tracked, I think they recorded drums and they recorded bass, a lot of these guys do it. So anyway, one night the producer came to me and he said, "Hey, what's his name? Not Paul Stanley, but Gene Simmons. Yeah. Gene was wondering if you'd give him a ride back to his place, And I'm like, no, man, I'm going the other direction, because I didn't want him to ask me. And my impression, and the producer's impression was that he was going to ask me if I wanted to do it.
Oh, wow. Okay, there you go.
And I'm like, there's no way I would have done that, for no amount of money.
Yeah.
So I just didn't let it go that far,
Yeah. No, fair enough. Yeah. And look, I think a very far lesser known aspect of your career, and I didn't realize it until I was doing research, but you did some work with actor Bruce Willis. on an album of his. Of course, he's far more famous for his acting, to the point where I didn't even realize he had albums out, but there they are, and there you are on them. So the solo album is If It Don't Kill You, it just makes you stronger. So is he a real cat? Is he a real musician? And can you tell me about working with him?
I did the one record with him that you just mentioned the title. No, he plays a little blues harmonica, and he can sing within a certain range in tune, and he has he's got a lot of energy. His clearly, we would say he has a lot of chi. He's got a lot of just personal, juice. And so the process was fun, and everything was tailored to fit him, so the record was built around him. It wasn't like you made something and then asked him to come up to that, you kind of, we built the record around him. And, he's not a musician. He's got some musical sensibilities, can carry a tune, but, and a nice guy also, but
nice.
Not really a musician.
Because of that work there, were there, I know, what's Night Rider's name? David Hasselhoff does albums. Were there more opportunities for you to work with these left of centre people who don't have a background in the music industry? Were they tapping you on the shoulder because of that album, or even before that?
Seems like there might be, but I can't think of anything. Not really.
Barbra Streisand Superman, Killer Session.
Yeah, well, I guess. Not much to say.
Okay, rightio. Yeah, it's a pairing that works on paper, no doubt, from the sounds of things there. But
well, there was just a whole bunch of musicians in the room, man. Steve Lukather was there. Jeff Porcaro, Abe Laboriel. 2 keyboard players. I'm incidental. I had no influence on that session whatsoever.
Right. Okay.
She could have done better, probably with somebody else.
Case of too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak.
No, I was never really a studio musician. I never had the sensibility. I didn't have the gear. I wasn't really attuned to that environment. I was a live player, and sometimes people would, bring me in on a session, and as often as not, I wouldn't necessarily really be the right guy. It took a long time for me to become adept at accompanying, and really knowing how to fit into a situation in a way that really contributed. It's a real skill, and some people, I think, they're just more attuned to it. I mean, someone like Steve Lukather, he grew up in the studios, man.
Yeah.
I mean, he was doing sessions when he was 19.
Yeah.
I was playing with Charlie Musselwhite when I was 19. I only knew one guitar and one amplifier. I'd never made a record in my life. So just very different backgrounds. So, the people who belonged there really were the people who did it for a living,
Yeah.
I remember one time Larry Carlton saying to me, when I first met Larry, I was living in LA, and I think the Joni Mitchell tour had finished, and he called me. Now, I still didn't know him. I'd only met him briefly, but he called me after I'd gotten off the road with all of this stuff. And, he said, "You want to come over?" I said, "Sure." So we hung out for an evening, and we wound up doing a few shows at this club in North Hollywood. But he said to me, he goes, "Yeah, I mean, if you want to do the studio thing, you need to take about $5,000, buy a bunch of great gear, learn how to use it, learn how to work with small amps, be able to have a good sound at low volumes, and know the right microphones to use, if the engineer doesn't, and, all of those things. And it's just, I never did it, that wasn't what I wanted in my life. I wanted to make my own music, record, tour,
Yeah.
play.
Well, I might be paraphrasing here, but I don't know how many other musicians the great Miles Davis said this to, but words along the lines of, when you were leaving, come back anytime you want.
Yeah.
I don't know how many other people he would have. Sorry, my camera will come back on in a moment. There we go.
Okay.
Is it going to come back on? There we go. Must be Miles. Miles must be telling us something here. But what were your memories of working with Miles?
Well, of course, the highlight of my career was working with Miles. My ultimate musical icon, and I got to play with him. And he wasn't happy when I left. And he did say, if you ever want to come back, you just come back. And that was astonishing to hear. I was with him for about 6 months, 5.5, 6 months, toured some in the US and toured in Europe for about 5 weeks. We were over there for a while, I think, maybe 3 weeks. So my time with him was fairly short, but of course, he makes a big impression, without picking up his horn, And we rarely saw him except right before the gig. We'd all be at the side of the stage waiting to go on. And then Miles would just kind of stroll out of his, dressing room. He'd be just walking real slow, playing his trumpet a little bit. And his tour manager's trying to hook up his wireless device, And we'd go out and play, and then he'd split, But he would call me on the phone every now and then. In New York, I actually lived on the other side of the park from him in a much worse apartment in New York City at the time. And I said, Robben, how you doing? What you doing? And I had conversations with him, that would be, 20 minutes long. We're just talking on the phone. And so a little bit of interaction on the road, where he'd say something, to me. We'd have some kind of an exchange, or he'd play a joke on me or anybody else, or he was always sort of like poking you. He would say something kind of salty, something challenging, is the way I would put it.
Yeah.
Kind of. And, I figured out that he wanted you basically to spar with him. He didn't want you to go, oh, gee, I don't know, be scared. He didn't want you to be scared. Although what he would be doing would be, would make you nervous. So I figured that out, and that made things much easier, in terms of relating with him, whenever it happened. So it was great. Absolutely the most, confirming experience, after I played with Miles Davis and I knew that he liked my playing, and he would rather I was in his band than not. That gave me a confidence that, I hadn't before then had, I was like 35 or 6 when I played with him. Yeah. I was going through a lot of struggle during that period of time. I was trying to get my own solo career off the ground, and I was having a lot of trouble making that happen because of this jive record producer who had signed me to Warner Brothers. So I was kind of like, I was already signed to the label. I'd already, the demo for the Talk to Your Daughter album was done and got me a deal. And then it just dragged on and on and on. The guy was never happy. It took 4 years for that album to be released. And so, it gave me the time to do some other things, which was one of them was play with Miles Davis,
Yeah, outstanding. Very few people have a resume similar to yours in the music industry. So I'm going to this will be my final question, and I want to bring things full circle here to almost where we started. So look, aside from Pure, which is definitely a career highlight as far as I'm concerned for you, if you had to if you had to pick an album or a session to somebody who never heard you before but became intensely interested in some of your work, but they didn't know where to start, where would you say to them, this is where you should start?
Well, probably Tiger Walk. I mean, the new record is, it's a very sophisticated, it's a very mature work. I mean, it is. It's the culmination of my entire career, all poured into one record. I would put it that way. And still, going forward, still growing, still coming up with new things, things I've never done before. I mean, that improvisation on the song Pure, it's an Indian raga. That's an Indian scale, that I had figured out just listening to something I liked. And I'm like, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to go for it. We're going to play Indian music, And so I'm proud of myself that I actually had the guts, the nerve to go ahead and do that and leave it on the record, It takes nerve. Trust me. But the Tiger Walk record, for me, it's got all the R&B in it. It's got the blues in it. It's got the Miles Davis influence in it. And, I've spent many years now writing songs and really working hard at that, developing myself as a vocalist, so that I could just pick up an acoustic guitar and sing you a song and it would be a really good song, well done, I made a choice to start to reach that goal. And when you make a choice like that, you leave other things behind, So the instrumental thing got left behind. Tiger Walk was 15 years ago, and this is my first instrumental album since then. So I got good at writing songs, and making records that I'm proud of. I like the songs, I like the productions, everything. But just bottom line, I'm a guitar player. I have to admit that to myself even. And Tiger Walk, that record is a blast. It's a blast. It rocks. It was incredibly well recorded. It's live performances. There are guitar solos that are overdubbed, but those rhythm tracks are burning, and some of the performances are absolutely live. I think I Can't Stand the Rain is a live guitar solo. Oasis, it's just the band playing in the room, man. And again, all the tracks are absolutely live. And boy, what a rhythm section, Steve Jordan on drums, Bernie Worrell on keyboards, just fantastic. And the bass player is actually a drummer.
Well,
and his name escapes me right now.
Yeah.
Charlie Drayton.
Drayton.
One of the great in-band drummers.
He lives in Australia. He was married to Chrissy Ampler.
Right.
He's in Cold Chisel at the moment.
Say that again?
He's in a band, they're very famous in Australia, Cold Chisel, with Jimmy Barnes. Yeah. He's playing drums in them.
Look that up right after I get off, because I want to hear that. I mean, yeah, Charlie's one of the great drummers, but he played bass with Keith Richards, right?
Yes. Yeah.
He was in the Expensive Winos.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, spot on.
I heard that record, Talk Is Cheap. The first, of the, I think he made at least 2, maybe 3 records with that band. At Bernie Worrell and Steve Jordan and Charlie on bass. And I went, I want that rhythm section. And I wound up making the record I wanted to make, man, and it was scary because, they're all in New York and I was still living in Los Angeles at that time. And so I wrote all that music for Tiger Walk, just me in my studio. I never recorded anything. And I don't do that. I don't make demos. I sat down with the guitar and I would, write a song and then write out chord charts and maybe some bass lines. And I took all that music to New York. I didn't know those guys at all, and never heard the music, didn't know if it was worth a damn. And really nervous, man, really nervous. And at the end of that week, we had all those brilliant tracks, but melodies weren't even written for a lot of those songs. I wrote the melodies after the fact. So it was a scary record to make. And to this day, here I am saying that would be the one.
Well, Robben, I'll leave it there. Your career is a tour de force of epic guitar performance that I think people will be listening to in decades. And I'm not going to overstate the case here, but maybe even hundreds of years' time, because, I mean, it's there for posterity, your catalogue. Thank you so much for making the music that you've made. It is meaningful and it is important in a global and a universal sense as well, that real musicians like yourself have tapped into your genuine source of creativity. And now you've got this killer album, Pure. So I look forward to listening to that for many years to come myself.
Thank you, Andrew. Very kind, and I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Well, all the very best, and it's been an absolute joy to talk to you, mate.
Pleasure.
Thanks
so
much.
See you, man.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
There you have it. That was my conversation with the great Robben Ford. If you enjoyed the conversation with Robben, there are plenty more that resemble that one. That was a bit special though, wasn't it? But either way, plenty of conversations over at scarsandguitars.com. If you love chats with musicians from the world of rock, metal, punk, extreme metal, and beyond, guitarists such as Robben. I've had a chat to, actually I should mention this now, I've had a chat to Don Felder from the Eagles. You can find that chat. Same with a conversation with Al Anderson, who's a fellow that played the guitar on so many Bob Marley recordings, and also Peter Tosh as well. But that guitar line that you hear at the beginning of No Woman, No Cry, that's him. And Al Di Meola was another highlight as well. But there you go. I love having conversations with musicians, so what can I say? Please like, subscribe, share, comment. It all helps. My name's Andrew Mackay-Smith, and I'm the host of the Scars and Guitars podcast series. I appreciate the fact you tuned in.